Ladies and gentlemen, we continue our program by addressing the delicate balance between national independence and international collaboration. Please welcome our next group of experts for our panel, Reclaiming Our Sovereignty, Preserving Autonomy and Cooperation in Supranational Institutions. Our discussion features Boglárka Bólya, Ministerial Commissioner responsible for the promotion of sovereignty reform of the European Union, Anthony Gillen, Chief of Staff of MCC Brussels, Anatol Levin, Director of the Eurasia Program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and Nikolai Pavlov, Project Manager at Identaria. The panel will be moderated by Damil Devényi, researcher at the Center for European Studies at MCC. Please join me in welcoming our next panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us after a delicious lunch. Welcome back. Beautiful day in Budapest, beautiful day for a conversation on sovereignty. I'd like to remind our students especially, given that it's a rare occasion to be able to have so many high caliber individuals on the stage, send in your questions via Slido. I'll have them up here, and towards the end of the panel discussion we can get into some of the questions from the audience. Thanks also to the MCC for organizing another fantastic Budapest Summit, this one on Reclaiming the West, and also to the International Directorate team for all their hard work. Before we get into the real crux of the matter, I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to give a brief 5-minute introduction, starting from the right side with Ms. Boglárka.
It works? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for organizing this conference on sovereignty. It's highly timely, as I think sovereignty is under attack in the EU. Why do I think that? In recent years, there have been strong efforts to deepen European integration. Some openly speak about United States of Europe. In contrast, the Europe of nations idea is often criticized, delegitimized, mostly based on political and ideological grounds. However, we think that the Europe of nations means something very simple and natural, basically that we are stronger together than alone, but we can still remain who we are. This is actually the original idea. This approach is the original idea behind the European integration. But in line with this deepening approach, recent trend shows that EU institutions seek to increasingly expand their powers. And these competencies overtaken by the EU institutions tend to touch upon the core elements of national and constitutional identity of the member states. And nowadays, this so-called competence creep has become a common practice in the European Union. While the system of checks and balances is not functioning effectively, we need new solutions, but at least better coordination to protect the sovereignty of the member states. Because competence creep is indeed a sovereignty question. Member states are the exclusive holders of sovereignty, and only they are the ones who can decide which powers they share and which competencies they exercise jointly via the institutions. And if this decision is taken out of their hands, then the sovereignty is severely damaged. If the rules laid by the treaties, which is actually was a construction of the free choice of the member states, so if the rules laid by the treaty are overruled by the EU institutions, we cannot talk about sovereignty. Actually, the integration without sovereignty is merely empire building. And this is why the Hungarian government launched the systematic review of the competencies of the European Union last autumn. We had 5 conferences and we collected several studies. The aim of this competence review is very clear, is we want to see where and how the EU expanded its powers, and we want to uncover the practice of the competence creep in the field of economic policy, energy, migration, rule of law, and education, culture, and family policy. And apart from the competence creep, there is another deeply serious threat to the member state sovereignty. These are the attempts to extend majority voting in council decision-making areas that would require unanimity, and also the misuse of the legal basis basically to adopt decisions by qualified majority that would otherwise require unanimity. And these are quite strong recently in the foreign and security policy areas. But however, this is a one-way street, because one wrong decision would mean that we lose our treaty-based rights to anonymous decision-making, and we will lose our ability to defend the will of the Hungarian people in crucial situations, questions like enlargement, budget, or even war. And the Hungarian government will not consent to a shift from unanimous decision-making to qualified majority. To sum up, because I have spoken quite a lot, to sum up, reclaiming sovereignty doesn't mean rejecting Europe. It means respect the treaties, it means respecting the member states and keeping the cooperation based on free and equal nations. Thank you.
Please, yeah.
Okay, thanks ever so much for the opportunity, MCC, Demille. I'm Anthony Gillen from MCC Brussels. We're a think tank in Brussels. We bring people together, we work very hard, and we also have a lot of fun challenging the technocratic groupthink of the globalist elite. And if you want to come and join us sometime, check out our website, and particularly for the students in the audience, you are very welcome to apply for an internship with us and learn more about our work. So just on the subject matter in hand, first of all, Boglárka mentioned competence creep, and we had a publication which Boglárka was involved with the launch of, Empire of Law by my colleague Dr. Philip Siget, really great on how the European Court of Justice has played a fundamental role in enabling competence creep. So I highly recommend that to you. And also one of our research fellows, Thomas Fazzi, The Silent Coup, and that looks at how through crises, from, for example, COVID, Ukraine, and onwards, and the financial crisis before that, through crises, the European Commission has grabbed more and more power. Excuse me. So I recommend those publications to you, but in terms of my opening comments, I want to take a slightly different approach. We're talking about the European Union here. We're also talking about other supranational bodies. I don't know if you've noticed, but since Trump got elected, one of the phrases that more and more politicians are using, certainly, I'm British, by the way, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is using, is national interest. More and more national leaders are talking about national interest. And I think that's really relevant. Trump's put national interest on the agenda with Make America Great Again, okay? And the reality is, if you're going to have what Boglárka rightfully talked about, a Europe of nations, a Europe of nation states that cooperate and collaborate, but they still have national sovereignty. If you're going to have that, each nation has to know its own national interest. That's absolutely fundamental. That's at the core, knowing your own national interest. Now, just to give you an example, for me, it's rather embarrassing being British right now, because Keir Starmer has zero idea of our national interest. When asked what the national interest is, he has to run to our Attorney General to find out what international law says. In other words, international law these days seems to define the UK national interest. And then when he gets a bit concerned that he's upset Trump too much and he needs to be a little bit more supportive with regards to the situation in Iran, he's got so little idea of the national interest, which, to be honest, the previous government also had so little idea, that he discovers that whilst we've got 2 aircraft carriers, neither of them are fit to go out to sea, and we've got 0 frigates ready to go out there and protect them, and we're left in a situation where our air bases on Cyprus are not fully protected. And Cyprus is rightly saying, are you kidding us? You've got air bases here, and we've now got incoming drones, and you have not got proper military preparedness to protect us. So we've lost a sense of national interest. And I know I don't have too long, so I just want to say a few words why I think how that's come about. And because I think it's really important to whether we can get to somewhere more positive in the way in which Boglárka has indicated we need to go. So if you look at Keir Starmer, just as an example, you could look at any of the national politicians. Reality is that they're much more comfortable being part of a global elite. They're much more comfortable at Davos. They're much more comfortable at an international conference. They're much more comfortable hanging out with other cosmopolitan people than they are with their own people. Their own people are something either distasteful, who have the wrong ideas, backward values, outdated ideas, and their own people can't be trusted to make the right decision, as was proved by Brexit, according to the British elite. Now, I know that's a controversial topic here, so we perhaps won't go into Brexit too much, but they are much more comfortable keeping at arm's length from their own people. And that brings us to what Boglárka was talking about in terms of empire building, because I think it's much more insidious and dangerous than just competence creep. Competence creep is almost like the friendly end of what's going on here. What all of the political leaders have recognized is that homogenous groups of people based in nations with nationally specific cultures that have developed generation over generation over generation are dangerous to them. And it goes back to the point that Zoltan Soloi made in his welcome address about how a culture is not just something you experience in a museum. A culture is something you live. A culture is something that has existed over generations and gives you an ethical standpoint. The culture gives you an ethical standpoint that's distinct. That, for political leaders who don't really know what they're doing, is dangerous because it means there's a commonality amongst people. There's a sense of bond. You might have different opinions about what you should do on each political question, but you are coming at things from a common direction, and you are therefore much more able to hold your political leaders to account. And they've recognized this, and what they've done is try to change the population in two key ways. One is mass migration, which Hungary's done a fantastic job of avoiding that mistake. One is mass migration, so that actually part of your population is now not homogenous, and they don't have those bonds, they don't have those generational links. And two, you then bring in programs around that mass migration, call it multiculturalism, to educate everybody else why their understanding of themselves and their place in that society is wrong. So you undermine and corrode those bonds, and you sow moral confusion. The other way in which this has been done is through LGBTQI, and that whole promotion of the idea that actually a man can be a woman. And worse, and I'll end on this because I know I'll go over time otherwise, the worst part is actually we need to be talking to youngsters age 4 and 5. It's okay to be confused about whether you're a boy or girl. We need to encourage them to feel comfortable about that. That's the agenda, right? And that's coming not just from the EU, it's also coming from the World Health Organization. So there's lots of these sorts of bodies involved in that. And by creating that moral confusion, again, it weakens the links between people, and it makes the relationships in families very, very difficult, because parents are being told, no, you step out of this one. We, the state, have got this. We understand how these young people get confused, and we're looking after this situation. You keep out of it. So it's undermining the family as well. And although Hungary's taken a really good line on all of this and doesn't allow LGBTQI teaching to schools, never mind, the European Union SERVE programme, which is funding, I forget what it exactly stands for, but it's equalities, rights, values, etc. They've given 177,000 euros to a project run by Amnesty International Hungary to train Hungarian teachers off campus to take these ideas and materials into Hungarian schools. So one of my other research fellows has written a report about this. So the EU is circumventing national governments on really key and important sensitive issues. So if we're going to get back to where we want to be, if we're going to rediscover national interest, we have to point out and make sure that it's understood to be completely unacceptable for sowing this division in our society, making white people in many European countries apologize for their privilege, which is another big project of the EU, actually. And I don't have time to go into it, but I'll come back to it perhaps in discussion. So that's what my opening comment.
Thank you. We will definitely have time to touch on the cultural parts. Mr. Lieven?
I think you just speak.
I just speak? Yeah. Okay, I'll just speak. I should begin with a confession, which I'm sure is not true of my colleagues. I've never understood how the European Union works and how its institutions relate to each other. But then again, I'm not going to call for a vote, but I suspect that that is true of the absolutely overwhelming majority of Europeans, including probably members of national elite. Certainly, even while Britain was part of the European Union, I never met a British MP who could, except of course the ones based in Brussels, who could tell me how the European Union worked. And I think that's part of the point. You know, you have these institutions, you have these people in Brussels, and they pursue a kind of magic. You know, they live in their bubble, and they do things which outside the bubble nobody really understands, but more importantly and more dangerously, of course, for a very long time, people outside the bubble were not really interested in because they thought it didn't really matter that much. Well, we are discovering that now it does matter, as part of what we have heard has been the creep towards European institutions that are now far, far more powerful than they were, but also they're far more powerful than they were meant to be. I mean, one key point here is, with regard to Britain, it's often said that in 1973 the British public voted by a large majority to join the European Union. They did not. They did not. They voted to join the European Economic Community. It was something very, very different. And developed into the European Union through a series of processes, most of which European populations had no say. So I think, I mean, the first principle is we have to go back to national referendums, you know, not just for new treaties, but for any significant change in the powers of the European Union, because it's quite clear that the European Parliament is quite incapable of acting as a check here. Now, the problem is, of course, when it comes to returning sovereignty, well, it's a bit like, you know, the old joke about the man who asked for directions to Dublin. And the local said to him, well, sir, if I were going to Dublin, I wouldn't start from here. So much has now been centralized, especially, of course, in the damnable form of the euro, that which Britain, thank God, did not join, because if we had joined, Brexit, getting out of the European Union, would have been even more painful, much, much more painful and difficult and disruptive than it actually was. And of course, as we also discovered in Brexit, the European elites will do everything possible to make that process as painful as possible. So on the one hand, the process of returning sovereignty to national governments and national electorates is essential, but it is going to be, in many ways, very complicated. I would say that Hungary has made a very good start. I think that other countries will follow. But insofar as very few people now want to actually break up the European Union because you know, of the chaos that could indeed would probably result, we need to start thinking very carefully about the modalities, the stages, the processes by which this return of sovereignty needs to be pursued, and also how far and in which fields. Certainly in the area of immigration, I would say that this is absolutely essential and urgent. The second thing, though, is, and we've heard some reference to this, something that, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has clearly been used, and in an absolutely classic way, by governments going back to early modern Europe, no, probably much further, to ancient Rome. The manipulation of an alleged outside threat to justify and drive state centralization and the increase in central state powers. Now it's being used to drive the centralization of the European Union. So I would say that peace, a peace settlement in Ukraine, and I think a decent one is now in sight, though unfortunately it's not, it won't be a settlement that the European Union has played any positive role in. But a peace settlement in Ukraine is an essential first stage towards, if not rolling back, at the very least blocking any further centralization of the European Union. And my final point is that not just when it comes to the Eurocrats and the EU institutions, but at the national level as well. The rule of the economists, the rule of the technocrats, the whole Blairite idea of, the sphere of politics being left to the supposed experts. And that was accepted for a while. It really began to be not accepted with the financial crisis of 2008. But it was accepted for a while most people could believe or could be persuaded that these people's rule, this rule of supposedly objective, unelected experts, actually worked, that they were experts, that they were efficient, that their programs and their policies, resulted in something. Now, today, it's impossible to believe that anymore. If one sees the record of governments and establishments over the past generation. And when it comes to the issue of rearmament, now, to some extent, of course, this is necessary. It is quite true, as you said, Anthony, that Britain, for example, has let its armed forces decay to a quite ridiculous extent. But on the other hand, as we also see, even from Germany, national governments in the last resort will not major national governments will not sacrifice ultimately control over this. They may pretend to, they may make speeches, but ultimately they will keep this in national hands. And therefore we risk ending up with the worst of both worlds. That is to say, a megalomaniac declarative program at the European Union level of massive rearmament, which in turn will drive demands for greater centralization and for an active EU role on the world stage and with regard to the Ukraine peace process. But on the other hand, will not actually lead. It will spend huge amounts of money, but it will not lead to positive results because ultimately countries will continue to defend their militaries and their military-industrial complexes. To end, on a more positive note, at the same time, I would say that this is not probably necessary, because while the Russian threat to Ukraine is obvious, and indeed to Georgia, and other places within the former Soviet Union, although not actually in most places active. It's a sort of latent threat, like the rules of the Monroe Doctrine as far as the United States is concerned. The whole idea of a deliberate, direct Russian planned attack on NATO and the European Union is, in my view, nonsense, given the lessons of the Ukraine war, and the fact that when the Russians say that they have no interest in doing this, that there is no reasonable goal that they could possibly aim at through this, I think that we can believe them. So the other thing that we need to do is really work to reduce this atmosphere of hysterical fear in Europe, which I think, once again, in a very classic way, which we've seen again and again in history, is being used by elites with their own very particular interests to increase their own power. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Pavlov, thank you for your patience. Some opening remarks on your end?
First, thank you for this invitation. It is a great honor to be here. It's a great honor to be here. I'm sure that this event will have great impact on the future of the West and Europe in particular. My name is Nikolai Pavlov, and I'm project manager of the Identaria project. This is a research project, and more specifically a concept development and experimentation project, which seeks to enhance the peace-building potential of European nationalism. I can assure you that it is not an easy task to find a model for aligning nationalisms in Europe under a common framework. The tentative name of this framework, European nationalism, could even be more precise in terms of European supranationalism, as we are different nations, of course, but if we make use of Lev Gumilyov's terminology, which he employed in terms of Eurasian studies, then the term European supranationalism is legitimate. So the project is focused on several topics, but I think the most important and practically feasible area for achieving not only coexistence but cooperation between nationalisms in Europe is the research area. And that's why I will focus on reclaiming our sovereignty in the research area. What are the reasons for this, and what is the background? For many decades in the Western academia, there has been strong pressure against anything else except left-wing and woke type of research, although it could be contested if this is research at all. To great extent, especially in Western Europe and in the United States, there is left-wing dominion over the academia. In the latest years, there have been multiple cases of repressions against academics with right-wing views. There have been even sanctions against certain academic institutions. EU funds, for example, for Modul University in Vienna, have been stopped effectively. And this is detrimental to European science, and this limits the horizons of European science. And this is one of the main reasons why we need to focus our attention on the cooperation in the area of research. Presently, there is a large European-wide research and innovation program. Many of you have probably heard of it, which is called the Horizon Europe. It is managed by the European Commission. And most of the research, especially in the social sciences and the humanities, is shaped by left-wing ideology and any type of right-wing research is practically not allowed and not funded under this program. What I think is feasible is the development of a research program for the European patriotic forces, a right-wing national conservative research program outside the institutional framework of the European Union. What could be the objectives of such a program? I think the main strategic objective should be the provision of professional research support to the European patriotic parties for the next EU Parliament elections in 2029. Research support is part of the political fight. Because without the research support, without science-backed research, policy making is very difficult, and sometimes it looks like it looks not serious enough. And I think that such a research program could be very helpful for the European patriotic forces, and such a research program should be affiliated with both existing political groups in the EU Parliament, Patriots for Europe and Europe of Sovereign Nations. And in my view, it could be very useful for strengthening the research background, the political ammunition, if you like, of those political groups. And this is something practical, I would say, kind of a small strategy for reclaiming the West in the research area. And I think it would be a good start to begin there in the research area. So that's it from me at this point.
Thank you. Thank you all of our panelists for their opening remarks. Now I can ask some questions. You can also ask some questions. Remember to send in your questions via Slido. I'd like to start here in Europe, taking zooming out a little bit, looking at the past 2 decades. The European Union has faced, it's a miracle, it's still even afloat. It's faced financial instability, mass migration, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and not just the European Union as an institution, but these supranational institutions like the World Health Organization, NATO, the UN. Looking back and starting with Ms. Boglárka, how have these events shaped the Union's trajectory, and why do you think questions of sovereignty specifically are so central at this current stage?
Yes, well, briefly, I think there are 2 main reasons, but obviously we can talk hours about that, but we don't have time for that. So first, I think that the efforts are very strong to build a United States of Europe. My minister, János Bóka, who is Minister for European Union Affairs, often refers to a myth, which is the myth of the ever closer union. And according to this myth, deeper integration is not just desirable, but it's inevitable, which means that actually the Union always have to move towards greater centralization, regardless of the will of its member states or its citizens. And those who dare to question this dogma, like us, like Hungary, we are dismissed often and labeled Eurosceptic, anti-European, and we are punished also, but that we can talk about it later. And while actually what we are doing, or what they are doing, is just basically defending the foundation of the European Union, basically that the member states are the master of the treaties, the master of the future, and the architect of the European Union. So for us, basically, deeper integration doesn't mean an automatic necessity, but a political authorization based on democratic choices in the member state and conferred powers conferred by the treaties. And then second, as you rightly mentioned, about the crisis, and then Anthony also spoke about that, because when the conference in November, we spoke about it at length, that these crises actually have often been used to justify more centralization. And step by step, we have seen these efforts basically to shift away member states' competencies, to shift away the decision-making power from member states to the Central European Union, and basically eroding the treaty limits and eroding the treaty balance. But we think that the crisis should lead to more cooperation, but not to silent power transfers. And this is what basically the European Union has been using in the past, I would say, mostly in the past decade. And the crises were just a good pretext for that.
So it's almost the greater the crisis, the greater uniformity you need, the greater conformity is being projected from Brussels, at least, to its member states. Okay.
A bit more than that, but maybe Anthony can. No, Anthony can answer. Well, actually, when you got this, it's not just conformity and not just homogeneity, but it's also basically you have to do what they say. And when your decision-making power is taken away from you, then basically you're not sovereign anymore. For example, in COVID, I mean, in Hungary, we had basically the most vaccination, but there is a word for that, but I don't remember in English, while the European Union was lagging behind, but still it basically, it didn't prohibit us, but then we were punished because we were basically also using the Russian and Chinese vaccinations. While they were lagging behind, then we were saving much more lives than the European Union with the common vaccination tenders. So that's just one example.
Very good. Mr. Gilland, I'd like to bring you into this conversation specifically about Brussels and from the perspective, your vantage point in Brussels. You worked to defend NatCon Brussels earlier, 2 years ago, I believe, and you also convened later the Battle for the Soul of Europe conferences. Do you think this is an episode of a deeper crisis, not just in the institutional authority of Brussels, but also like a narrowing of public discourse, like what is allowed to be spoken about, the policing almost, state policing of language?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you referenced NatCon, which was National Conservative Conference in Brussels 2024. That came at a key moment, April 2024, just 2 or 3 months prior to the European parliamentary elections in June 24. And at that point, people in Brussels, in the EU bubble, were getting really worried about the success of patriot parties. There wasn't a patriot group at that point, but there were patriot parties. And actually, the rightward shift that was being predicted in those European parliamentary outcomes was significant, but not as far as people thought it might go. So you had almost like blind panic taking place in the Brussels bubble about what the consequence might be. And one thing we know about the European Union, the elites that run it, is they are committed to a post-national identity. They are 100% committed to a post-national identity. They don't believe in national identities. They think they're dangerous, which is why Hungary gets punished €1 million a day for defending its borders, yeah? They absolutely don't believe in that. So when they see these patriotic parties doing well off the back of massive farmer protests in Brussels, increased popular vocalization about their disgust at the level of mass migration and how they weren't consulted. Increasing numbers of people, families saying, hang on a minute, what's going on to my children's education? Why are they getting given all this strange stuff, LGBTQ? More and more people were speaking out. They were finding their voice, and that rattled them. And so that's where you get the cordon sanitaire, which you know how that operates. Basically, the patriotic and national conservative parties are excluded. You have the Digital Services Act, which does exactly what you say, the policing of language, and the House Judiciary Committee in the Republican House Judiciary Committee has just brought out some great stuff, drawing out how far that goes. So the policing of language becomes very, very important, because once people start to voice their concerns, they form bonds again. They connect with each other. They go, hang on a minute, why have we been putting up with this so long? And what happens if we push back? And if we push back, they actually find that they begin to make some progress, yeah? So the policing of the language becomes so, so important. And that's why you're seeing through the Digital Services Act this incredible attempt to control the big platforms. I mean, just the one headline example on that is that the House Judiciary Committee exposed was for TikTok, where they have this code for your feed, FYF, for your feed. And so that something would be promoted to you if it was likely to be of interest to you. Anything that was expressing the view that a man cannot become a woman was not allowed to go in for your feed, based on the pressure that they were put under through the Digital Services Act by the EU. So you're absolutely correct about the policing of language, but it's on the positive side. Often we get a bit doomy and gloomy in these situations. On the positive side, that is in response to their fear about people finding their voice and fighting back.
To push a little bit further on this, do you think there's a sense where this Mandarin elite class in the Silver City, whatever you might want to call it, has detached itself from what the public really wants, or what the public goes through on a day-to-day?
Yes, very, very much so. But I just think one little corrective is that, and I do it a lot myself, being based in Brussels, we're in danger of talking like this elite class is just in Brussels. And actually, the reality is, certainly in Western Europe, I'll be careful what I say about countries that are kindly hosting me, but in Western Europe, the elite class have gone hand in hand with this whole process, okay? So if you go back to Brexit, now I know we're not going to get into the rights and wrongs of Brexit, but the reality is that the complete elite class threw every possible lie into the media about what a disaster it would be to scare people off. They didn't want people to have the vote. Cameron made a catastrophic error, in their opinion, by saying he would allow a referendum. So that's just one example where the elite in national governments preferred to work hand in hand with the EU because it creates this perfect excuse. The things that we don't want to do that are politically controversial, we get the EU to do, right? So we agree that the EU is going to put in these regulations or this proposal or this sanction or whatever, and then when it comes up as a controversy, you go, well, we've got no choice, we're part of the EU. So I think it's important to recognise it's not just coming from Brussels, it's coming from national governments as well. So we need to spend more time looking at what's going on within nations. And that's where the detachment, you can call it out more easily. So the fact that you've got this situation, I mean, the best example is in Ireland. A recent wonderful book by a gentleman called Owen Linehan called Vandalising Ireland. And you've got a situation there where, following EU pressure, they introduced an anti-racism national plan, which promotes positive discrimination for minorities in jobs and promotes overrepresentation of minorities in the media and in adverts. So you'll see a lot of people in Ireland, and also increasingly in the UK, this may not relate to you guys, you might not quite get it, but to see non-stop on the TV programs and the adverts that 75% of the people being represented are ethnic minority. Now, I might be slightly exaggerating, but that's what the perception is. That's what it feels like. It's massive, yeah? This positive discrimination has gone so far. And that's because the elite don't care about national identity. They don't care about the population that were there. They're only interested in the present. It's a sort of form of presentism. It's like anyone can come here, anyone can be a citizen, because we don't want those connections with the past. We don't want those connections over generation, because the rootedness that was spoken about earlier, I think, again, it may have been Zoltan, or it may have been Matt, I can't remember, the rootedness of a society makes people less compliant. And if you're an elite that's not got confidence, not sure what it's trying to achieve, an unrooted population who are more compliant is much more desirable.
Thank you for those insights. Mr. Leven, looking from a historical perspective and looking at supranational institutions by the large, do you see a natural trend where supranational institutions expand beyond their original mandates? Is it inevitable that this would happen? And if it does happen, which I think we see that the case is it does, is it enough for them to be effective and that compensates for the fact that they are overstepping certain boundaries?
I mean, it's certainly happening. Whether it's inevitable, I would say not. I mean, a key question for the future, and fear of this, and it's by no means unjustified, is also being used to drive an ever closer union. Is that, contrary, of course, to all the expectations of globalization by these elites, now, not just under Trump, but one saw this, of course, beginning under Biden as well, partly as a result, of course, of domestic political backlash against open trade and what it has done to domestic industries, but also, of course, by the rise of China, this enormous giant, whose population, of course, is twice that of the US and the European Union put together. So there is this growing feeling that the world is going to be divided between great economic blocs. And therefore to have, well, I mean, to defend the economic interests of the countries of the European Union, not just the European Union itself, which is an entirely legitimate role or aim, but also to play a role on the world stage, to be there at the table, which is a much vaguer and more dubious proposition for me, except obviously in the economic field. This is strengthening the view among the elites that you must have a European bloc capable of negotiating on an equal basis with the Americans and the Chinese. There are solid arguments for this. But I can't remember whether it was Kissinger or somebody else, the famous statement about the European Union being an economic giant, a political dwarf, and a military midget. Well, we shouldn't be a military midget, but there's no need to try to be a military giant. And we need to negotiate, economically on the world stage, but you see again, well, you see two things, frankly. When it comes to relations with Russia, for example, you see that a small number of countries love this united European policy, EU policy, as long as they can dominate it, they can decide it. If there's ever a case where there's a policy decided by all the others that they disagree with, they have no hesitation whatsoever about using their veto to block it. And as a former European official said to me, if you have a situation in which there are 22 people around a table whose main objective is to maintain unity and keep things quiet and keep things together, and there are 4 or 5 people around the table who are absolutely determined to get their way and don't care how much of a crisis they cause, or in the last resort, even kick over the table, well, we know very well in human affairs which side is going to win. So the question is, how the European Union can pursue what may indeed be a necessary role when it comes to negotiating economics on the world stage, without this implying more and more and more undemocratic centralization of powers in the European Union, for which populations have never voted. Because, when it comes to the economic role of the European Union, or even of the European Economic Community on the world stage, that has been there for a long time, has sometimes been useful and necessary and effective. But that was going on long before Maastricht and long before the euro, and let alone these latest, moves towards extreme centralization. So I think the task is to try to find a balance there, because, on the other hand, it is obvious that if you have small, look, it's not the end of the world. You have small countries in Asia, or relatively in economic terms at least, which manage pretty successfully without being, part of at least enormous, tight economic blocs. Nonetheless, it's obvious that if you're a small country trying to defend your economic interests in the wider world, it's useful to have allies, reliable allies. But once again, the question is how you maintain this at an economic level without this also being used to really centralize the EU in ways for which European populations have never voted.
That would actually bring me right over to Ms. Boglárka for some clarification on EU competences and sovereignty reform. Especially, I think many of us know, but it's good to clarify the principle of conferral, right? In the treaties, anything that was not given directly to the EU, it belongs as a competence for the member states. Do you think this is a principle that the EU still holds close, or it's something that it violates here and there?
Here and there.
Delicately put.
You're totally right. I think that everything what I said before leads to this conclusion that the European Union doesn't respect anymore this basic principle, which is actually not a political choice. It's the legal foundation of the European Union. And sovereignty doesn't vanish at the European level. It is actually based on the principle of conferral. It is exercised jointly, together, with the member states, but by choice and consent. And if it's forced, then it's not the free choice of the member states. And what we see now is exactly this gradual erosion of sovereignty through the competence creep, so the creeping extension of powers. I always say that actually it's a treaty modification without a treaty modification, which is obviously not a correct way forward, legally surely not. Then the second is also like this via the competence creep and via imposing political and financial pressure over member states. So if you don't do what I ask, then you will be punished, very bluntly. And also imposing selective oversight and control and pressure mechanism. And this is exactly why we thought that it's very timely to launch this competence review, we would like to, or we will, or we actually did, we are almost in the end, whether this current division of the competencies are optimal, are balanced, also why the existing mechanism to defend basically member states' sovereignty and the competencies actually laid down and categorized in the treaty are actually not working, and to propose solutions, effective solutions to protect member states' sovereignty.
Thank you. So if I'm hearing it well, one of the key pillars of sovereignty would be, I'd like to bring Mr. Pavlov in here for the conversation. Nationalism is one of the main pillars then of sovereignty, the idea for a nation to be able to come together behind a certain core values and ideals. It has its own traditions and history. If this is the question, sovereignty being reclaimed, what kind of nationalism do you think we would be talking about? Is it 27 different ones in the case of Europe?
Well, nationalism is also a concept in transformation. It is not a static phenomenon. It has been constantly in transformation. In my view, nationalism is a biopsychological instinct, which has been there throughout human history. Of course, not in this form, but all those that wish to abolish an instinct, I think, don't stand a chance. It will be here, and as we see the return of the nation states, the latest US national security strategy refers to the primacy of the nations, which is obvious to everyone that there is a return to the nation states. And this is directly linked with a return to nationalism. The most difficult theoretical and practical question is how to find a proper model for peaceful coexistence of various nationalisms in Europe. And one of the possible solutions is peace through research. I will get back to this idea. The research area is the area where nationalists from different European countries could find common ground, could coexist, and could cooperate in a peaceful manner. So this is a concrete proposal in one specific area. Of course, the question that you pose is much more complex. We can discuss it a lot. But I think that nationalism is here to stay, and its role will be growing with the return of the nation state. Moreover, as all of us can see, international organizations have not proven great abilities to preserve international peace and security. For many reasons, one is the case of the United Nations, the European Union as well, NATO as well, other organizations such as OSCE and the World Health Organization. So I think we must turn to finding a way for nationalisms to coexist in a peaceful way. It seems that the great pretense of internationalism and globalism, that it can solve the problems of humanity, they remain hollow and empty when it comes to the real problems of the world.
I like this idea of peace through research. I mean, I'm a strong believer in the fact that it all starts with education, even from a very young level. If you can get a good education, you will eventually be led to make the right decisions, I would hope. But I got a question here, which I think ties right with your idea of peace through research. And I would even go so far as to say a case example is, as a lot of us may know, that a lot of Hungarian universities, about 21 or so of them, were excluded from EU funding, and as a consequence, it made its own national, with 2 or 3 national priorities, geared funding program for higher academic research. So in this context, for Nikolai, how can we ensure that the nationalistic right-wing research program you proposed avoids bias from bad actors, for example, the woke agenda or foreign nations or something else?
Yeah, that's very important indeed. I think we must start with a preparatory action of such a research program with a limited number of research projects, and one of the projects could be directly related with countering leftist and woke propaganda. I think it would be very useful at the EU level. And we have many cases of not only left-wing propaganda, but left-wing terrorism across Europe. Let's mention the murder of Quentin in France, which happened a few weeks ago. So a specific research project could be dedicated to this specific problem, I think.
So have a research program focused on making sure that the research programs...
A specific research project under the research program.
Okay. Mr. Lieben, very direct question for you. Working in nationalism and statecraft, do you see the nation state as the irreplaceable unit for democratic mobilization? In general, is sovereignty a zero-sum? Is it zero-sum, or can it be diluted without being? Can it be shared without being diluted?
I don't think it's completely zero-sum. I mean, obviously there are, real opportunities and needs for international cooperation. But of course, the word international means cooperation between nations. And I do believe that, yes, and I think there is really solid evidence to support that, democratic government, democratic control of government is only possible at the bounded national level, because citizenship, real citizenship, with duties as well as rights, is only possible at the bounded national level. Now, of course, you can have very large nations with, a very broad senses of national identity, like the United States, in its way, or well, China is not, of course, a democracy. But I would also say that the nation state was the entire and essential frame of modernity, of the creation of modern economies, modern institutions in general. I mean, that was not accidental. This whole academic debate on the origins of nationalism, on the part of those who say that, oh, well, this does not have deep roots, it doesn't come out of older identities, that this is a completely modern project. They don't then ask themselves because of course they don't dare, given the positions from which they are originating, ask the next obvious question. Well, in that case, was nationalism in fact essential? Was there any other way to organize modern states? Well, given that all the states that did succeed in organizing themselves did so on the basis of strong nationalisms, even the United States, in its way, 750,000 Americans died in the American Civil War to keep that state together. Now, they were fighting for two different nationalisms, but, the South believed that those cowardly Yankees wouldn't die to hold the United States together. Well, they would and did. So I think that, yes, the nation state remains the frame of democracy and the frame of modernity. I mean, in a wider and non-ideological sense. Personally, I detest many aspects of modernity, but we won't get into that. But at the same time, I mean, I think we must be clear that a whole range of international cooperations are also essential. The United Nations has, of course, inevitably, since, well, once again, what's its name? It's the United Nations. It's not United Humanity or United Parliaments. It's United Nations, made up of nation states. Now, obviously, when it comes to aims at a world government, it's failed completely. I mean, alas, because of the realities of great power politics, national politics, in many ways, at the really deep levels of international cooperation and the avoidance of war, it's also failed. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that, the World Health Organization, for example, it's done a number of pretty bad things recently, but we should not forget that it did also play a critical part in the elimination of smallpox, for example. International vaccination programs to wipe out deadly diseases have been very necessary and very effective. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole COVID business, but we shouldn't forget smallpox either, or bubonic plague. And a number of UN institutions have worked quite well from that point of view. And of course, there are needs in future as well. I mean, whether for international cooperation, whether they will succeed is a completely different matter. But certainly, I mean, the prospect of the militarization of space is, for me, a pretty nightmarish one. And there were international conventions governing that, weak ones, which are now, of course, collapsing. So I think the answer is you do need cooperation, international cooperation, but it has to be international cooperation between effective nation states.
International cooperation with independent nation states. Unfortunately, so far that has led us now into a Europe and a world with a fair bit of fragmentation. And even before I get to this question, I'm curious. The smallpox made me think of it, and it's in the bio for the panel. Is the unfortunate rock and hard place situation that small states end up in, because you have these international institutions that for a while had, or for certain elements, had been doing a lot of great work, and it was a direction that smaller states who were not as capable of, for example, with vaccines, developing their own, they could turn to this organization. What do they do from here on out? Do they turn to the west, to the east kind of divide?
Well, I mean, this is an absolutely fundamental problem going back, I suppose, as long as recorded human history lasts, and to which there is no ideal solution. You don't have to read Thucydides to know that, by definition, a small state is going to be weaker than a large and powerful state. But at the same time, I would be, against a centralized European Union, even if I thought it was going to work. But I don't believe it's going to work, because I think, democratic populations have made very clear that they will set limits to this because of their national allegiances, and once again, because of the desire for some measure of democratic control over what what governments do and what Brussels does. This isn't a very good answer, I'm afraid, but I doubt there are good answers. That somehow you have to combine once again, real national sovereignty with a recognition of reasonable levels of cooperation. And here, I think we have to begin also with peace. The idea, the European Union has developed this idea that only the European Union and NATO can maintain peace among their neighbours and among their members, and if they weren't there, Germany and France or Germany and Poland would go to war again. Well, in some parts of Europe that might be true, but there are reasons to worry, of course, about Germany becoming, a great military power again in Europe. On the other hand, anyone who knows the Germans today and German youth, has visited a German discotheque, knows that they are really not lining up, to reconquer Schlesien and Königsberg. The maintenance of peace in Europe, well, of course, this had in part absolutely tragic and catastrophic origins. It comes from the First and Second World Wars. But there has been a real cultural change there. And this, I think one can say, is in part due simply to a whole set of changes as a result of capitalism. Now, as a result of successful capitalism, whether this will survive unsuccessful capitalism is a completely different matter. But it's striking, even in the case of Russia and Ukraine, according to the image of Russia ought to have won this war 2 years ago at least. And this is, of course, exactly what the hardliners in Russia are saying to Putin. For God's sake, launch mass conscription. Our population outnumbers the Ukrainians 6-1 by now. Conscript 3 million men and end this. Do it the Second World War way. Putin's afraid that this will turn out the First World War way for Russia because the population will not like it. Russia is fighting this war with a very well-paid volunteer army because Putin does not dare conscript the mass of the population because they would not like it. And the last thing Putin wants is scenes like in Ukraine, and even Ukraine, which after all was attacked, is having tremendous difficulty now conscripting enough people into its military, because of course they're running away, partly here, and so you have all these scenes that we see of, people being clubbed on the street and dragged into vans, bussification it's called, to be sent off to the front, because in fact they aren't anxious to go on dying for their country, that's another thing, reason why this idea of a deliberate Russian attack on NATO and the European Union is such rubbish. If Putin isn't going to recruit 3 million men to win this war in Ukraine, which really is by now existential for him, he's certainly not going to do it to launch some completely ridiculous and insane attack on NATO. But I think, I think here the point is that you mustn't challenge countries on what they regard as their, well, certainly powerful countries, on what they regard as their truly vital national interests. Now, when the Chinese say, if Taiwan declares independence, we fight, fortunately, we listen to them and believe them. We should have believed Russia when it said, if you try to take Ukraine into NATO, if you try to expel us from Sevastopol, we will fight. But on the other hand, you do not see across most of the world by now, certainly the developed or even half-developed world, a great desire to go to war again, with neighbors. It is true that war in the world has immensely declined, that I think is due to really deep changes. So I think, I'm not saying we should become complacent, but equally we don't need to believe that an extremely powerful, centralized European Union is essential for peace in Europe. Some kind of European framework, yes, but it has to remain, within reasonable limits. The other thing I would say when it comes to military planning at the European level, before we fantasize about fighting Russia, we should be a lot more confident than we are at present about even being able to prevent a new war in the Balkans.
Very positive stuff here.
I'm an optimist to the core.
With just a few minutes left, I'd like to turn to some of the questions from the audience. I'll try and quick fire them so everyone can have a chance to respond, preferably a little more concise, brief answers. I think perhaps starting with Mr. Gland, why is Britain arresting more than 10,000 people each year for their online posts? Isn't this a violation of free speech, and doesn't this contradict Western ideals? I guess referring back to the culture element at the beginning.
Absolutely. So what's being referred to there is called non-crime hate incidents, and it is an absolute outrage. Britain rightly talks about its historic support for free speech. John Stuart Mill, one of the best exponents of the importance of free speech. And yet we've ended up in this place where what they introduced was this thing that it's not a crime, but it goes down and is recorded by the police. And what's recorded by the police is anything that somebody takes offence of. So if you've posted something on social media or even been overheard saying something in a shopping queue, yeah, and it could be a derogatory remark about some type of person or whatever, the person themselves can complain, but also somebody who's seen it online or overheard the comment in the shopping queue can complain. And then the police record it, and they say they're recording it because that helps them build up a picture of, is there a problem growing in that area? Is there something we need to keep our eye on? But having recorded it, they then decide to go and interview people. And as you've seen on the TV screens, you've probably seen it here as well, people have been dragged out of their homes, arrested, their laptops taken for, often they are quite offensive statements. They're not the worst I could think of. Sometimes they're just like, it could be actually just saying that a man cannot be a woman, that type of thing as well. Sometimes they are racist statements, yeah? But they are not breaking any common understanding of free speech, yeah? So you get into a debate about free speech. How have we ended up here? I think it's one of the best examples of what I began my introductory comments with, which is it's the distrust of people. It's the fear of people. It's the fear of people having a voice, because if they have a voice, if they express concern about that mass-scale immigration, if they express concern about that hotel for the asylum seekers, if they express concern about the transgender person who's going into their kid's school, or whatever concern it is, once they have a voice, they're connecting with other people who have concerns. And I think that's the biggest motivation behind bringing in these non-crime hate incidents. But they've been so unpopular and caused such international embarrassment, they are going to be finally replaced. Whether they're replaced with something better, we have to wait to find out. But yeah, it's been a massive scandal and embarrassment.
Hopefully we can return to a time when you could say and think for yourself without fear of reprisal. A slightly provocative question, Ms. Boglárka. With the threat of a new EU MFF, multi-annual financial framework budget looming, that would enable the EU Commission to potentially withhold even 100% of EU funding in Hungary. The question is, by Anonymous, and I think it's important that they remained anonymous, should Hungary exit the EU?
No. Answer is very easy. I don't know whether the one who asked this question remember that Orbán Viktor said that even if the EU is dismantling, we will be the last one who will hold the banner. With the MFF, just I have 3 minutes. I will try to be concise, but we actually didn't really talk about the examples about the competence creeps, and we have discovered a lot. So one is concerning this MFF goes back to, for example, the European semester, and MFF kind of leverage goes back to the European semester, these country-specific recommendations, which means that basically recommendations and non-binding instruments became de facto legislation. So in the economic policy, these country-specific recommendations basically are including rule of law, societal, policy, cultural requirements. And these kind of financial instruments now became the most powerful tool for leverage. So, for example, these country-specific recommendations, now integrating rule of law conditions, are integrated in the resilience and recovery facility plan, which are tied to EU funds. Very difficult indeed, but this is for a reason that no one understands, and basically everything is intertwined and interlinked with everything, so you cannot get out of it. Even if you agree with the Commission on one issue, then they come back with another one the next day, then you agree with something, and then, yeah, but there is a comma here, it's not good. So this is really, sorry to say, but the game of the Commission, they will always find something. And now the Commission increasingly links EU funds to this kind of conditions that you don't have really a legal foundation. And so this is what is happening. So the Commission is controlling basically the payments. The Commission is controlling whether these milestones are fulfilled or not. And if not, they don't release the funds. So this is when cooperation basically in the end transformed to a political leverage. And this is what they would like to have in the MFF also, that this kind of non-binding recommendations in the end became binding, and they will say that if you don't do that, then I will not give you the money, in very blunt words. So this is now the game, and this is what MFF hopefully will not be about, but there are good indications or bad indications that they will. And no, I don't think we want to exit again the European Union, and we will not. But it's true that now there is a patriotic turn in the continent. You rightly mentioned, also in that field, not just research, but in general. And we really think that this kind of movement will reshape the Union and also the direction of the Union, because we don't think that this is the good direction. And for example, what is important in this one is that the level of integration is basically decided by the sovereign decision of the member states and not via competence creep. And then at a certain point, you have to also think about what kind of solutions you can give to the member states if the existing ones are not working, because they are not working, because competence conferral doesn't work, subsidy principle principle doesn't work, that we have seen in many examples. And we have actually many forward-looking proposals. Also, there was a conference on the future of Europe in 2021-22 when Hungary had many proposals how to basically regain sovereignty. So some kind of more flexible cooperation can be thinkable, but also the main issue is that we turn back to the basic principle that basically strong nations make strong Europe, and then hopefully we will regain basically the principle of trust and the legitimacy of this cooperation, means the European Union, which is now, I think, a bit lost. And I finish. And this is also this kind of leverage can also lead to disintegration, and no one wants that.
I don't think I could have summarized it any better. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so please join me in giving a round of applause to our wonderful panelists for their amazing insights.